Actually, it's just her family. They say grief feels like a punch to the chest, but what no one tells you is that sometimes it shows up as 5 little words on a glowing screen. Cold, casual, and sent without flinching. I was standing at gate 36, tired but proud, clutching the heirloom veil like it might give me strength when Nate's text came through. Actually, it's just her family. No, hi, Mom. No, I'm sorry. No punctuation. Just a clean surgical cut, like I was being excised from my own child's life with the precision of a scalpel. I didn't read it twice. I didn't have to. Some words are written so clearly, they burn through the screen and carve themselves directly into your bones. Around me, the airport carried on in its usual blur. Children whining about snacks, businessmen barking into phones, a young couple kissing like they hadn't just spent 5 hours on the same plane. And me, a woman in her late 60s, standing perfectly still in her travel shoes and navy skirt, with a suitcase full of gifts and a heart suddenly heavier than the overhead bin limit. I didn't cry. I wish I had. Instead, I blinked slowly and sat on the nearest bench, arranging my coat over my lap with practiced composure. As if dignity were something you could zip up over a broken heart. The veil lay beside me, wrapped in linen, preserved and pressed like a memory that refused to die. My mother wore it in 1953. I wore it in 1978. Now it sat unused, folded between generations like a story no one cared to finish. And the check he hadn't asked for, but that I'd written anyway, was tucked inside a wedding card in my purse, waiting to be handed off with a kiss on the cheek and a whispered blessing. Not extravagant, but generous. Enough to be remembered. I'd paid for my own plane ticket, of course. Booked the hotel, packed a modest new dress, bought little ivory gloves I hadn't worn in years. No one had asked me to, but I did it. Because that's what mothers do. We come prepared, we show up, and I had shown up. For nothing. I stared at the phone for a moment longer, half expecting the bubbles, the typing indicator, to appear. An apology, a mistake, a follow-up. I'm sorry, Mom, it's complicated. Or even, can we talk? But there was nothing. Only that message. 5 words, and a universe of absence. I stood up slowly, adjusted my scarf, and wheeled my suitcase toward the taxi line. The sky outside was too bright, California bright, with palm trees that looked like they belonged in a postcard, not this moment. Back in Michigan, where I'd left behind melting snow and Richard's grave under a blanket of pine needles, the world had felt softer, realer. This sunshine felt like a lie. The driver was young, silent, wore mirrored sunglasses and didn't ask questions. When we pulled up to the hotel, a beige building with too many windows and no soul, he said, "Enjoy your stay," like the world hadn't just kicked me in the chest. The room was clean, generic. A bed, a lamp, a desk, a lemon-scented ghost town. I laid the veil on the bed, then the dress, then the card. I lined them up in a quiet little funeral procession of forgotten effort. Things meant to be part of something sacred. Now they sat untouched, undesired. Museum pieces from a life I was no longer allowed to participate in. Nate knew I was coming, knew I was bringing the veil, knew I had packed with hope and history. But he waited until I had crossed the country, until I stood 10 minutes from the arrivals curb, and then he erased me. Not with a phone call, not even with a lie that might soften the blow. Just that text, just those words. I changed into something more comfortable, sat in the armchair by the window, and stared at the parking lot below. There was a frozen yogurt shop across the street, a family laughing inside. Their mother was there. And I realized I hadn't just been uninvited, I'd been erased. And somewhere in that hollow realization, something deeper shifted. Not rage, not sorrow, something colder, resolve. I walked over to the hotel desk phone, pulled out the notepad and wrote 2 things. 1, cancel the transfer to Nate. 2, call Susan. Then I placed the pen down gently, as if that act alone closed a door behind me. He had made his decision. Now I would make mine. The desk in the hotel room was small, pressed up against the wall under a mirror that hadn't seen a real reflection in years. Evelyn sat there with her coat still draped over the chair, her fingers curled around the pen like it might argue with her. The notepad bore the header, "Compliments of the Marriott," as if corporate kindness might balance the weight of what she was about to write. She didn't hesitate. She'd already done the crying part, in silence, in the cab, in the bathroom when she realized her lipstick had cracked at the edges. This moment wasn't for grief. It was for decisions. 1. Cancel financial support. 2. Call Susan. She looked at the 2 lines, simple, clean, almost absurdly neat considering the storm behind them. It felt strange how quickly everything could shift. A week ago, she'd mailed in the RSVP card with a handwritten note saying, "So looking forward to it, darling." Now she was sitting in a hotel room she'd booked for a wedding she'd been erased from, penning a list that would sever 2 decades of quiet, invisible sacrifice. The first item was easy in theory. Evelyn had given freely over the years. Monthly deposits, birthday checks, help with mortgage payments when Nate and Jenna were in a pinch, which somehow lasted 3 years. She'd never kept score, at least not until she realized she'd paid for most of a wedding she wasn't invited to. It wasn't the money. Not really. It was the erasure, the assumption that she would always give, always show up, always be the silent support beam to someone else's curated life. She pulled out her laptop, clicked into her bank's portal, and signed in. 2-factor authentication, security questions. The process had always comforted her before. Today it felt clinical. There they were, scheduled transfers. 1 weekly, 1 monthly, 1 labeled simply N more, wedding. She hovered over the edit icon, then clicked. Delete, delete, delete. Each confirmation box that popped up asked, "Are you sure?" like a polite robot trying to save her from herself. "Yes," she whispered, "I'm sure." With the transfers canceled, the screen returned to its usual dashboard. A neat list of balances, like nothing had changed. But everything had. Next was Susan. She didn't bother emailing. Susan was old school, preferred calls, and always answered on the second ring if she wasn't in court. Evelyn pulled out her phone and dialed. "Green and Associates," came the voice. "Susan speaking." "It's Evelyn," she said. "Evelyn Moore." There was a brief pause, and then a warm shift in tone. "Evelyn, it's been too long. How are you?" "I've had better arrivals," she said flatly. "I'm in LA for my son's wedding. He uninvited me by text." Another pause. No gasp, no false sympathy, just space. "I see," Susan said. "I want to change the will," Evelyn said. "I want to remove Nate entirely. I want everything to go to my granddaughter, Lila. We've spoken before about the trust. I want to finalize it now." "Of course," Susan said. "Do you have time to come in while you're here? Tomorrow morning? I'll block the calendar. You still want the conditions we discussed? Age limit, education, healthcare, first home?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "And I want a clause added preventing Nate from contesting it." "Understood." They confirmed the time and hung up. Evelyn placed the phone face down on the desk. The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was clean. She walked back to the bed and sat on its edge, staring at the veil she'd placed so carefully the night before. It was still pristine, still folded in its tissue like a dream that hadn't yet been spoken aloud. But now it wasn't for the wedding. Not anymore. It was for memory, legacy, for Lila maybe, if she ever asked for it. Evelyn picked up the envelope with the wedding check inside. She opened it and slid the paper out. Her signature at the bottom looked too hopeful now. She stared at the amount. Not enough to hurt her financially, but enough to hurt. She folded it again, this time not with care, but with precision. She slid it into a new envelope, blank on the outside, and tucked it into her handbag. It wouldn't go to Nate, not now, maybe not ever. She stood, smoothed the comforter, and walked back to the desk. 2 lines written on the notepad. Only 2. But together, they marked the end of an era. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. She was done. Lila arrived 5 minutes early, just like she always had. She spotted Evelyn through the glass of the little cafe on Marlowe and Fifth, waved with both hands, and came in with her hair still damp from the shower. No makeup, no performance. Just Lila, 19, thoughtful, and disarmingly honest. "Grandma," she said, hugging her tight, "you look so pretty." Evelyn almost deflected. Almost said something about her travel clothes, her tired eyes, how the dress was years old, but stopped herself. Let her mean it. Let it land. She smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look like spring." They sat in the corner booth. The cafe was half full, all soft chatter and the clink of plates. The smell of roasted tomatoes and fresh basil lingered in the air. Evelyn folded her napkin across her lap, watching Lila fidget with her menu even though she always ordered the same thing. "Avocado toast and mint tea?" Evelyn asked. "You know me too well." That was the truth. Evelyn did know her, knew the cadence of her voice when she was nervous, the way she tilted her head when she didn't believe something, the exact shape her brow made when she was disappointed, but didn't want to say it out loud. She had watched her grow from a curious toddler into a young woman with strong opinions and soft eyes. And if Evelyn's son had grown into silence, Lila had grown into clarity. The server came and went. They ordered. They sipped water. Lila launched into a story about her roommate's broken blender and the smoothie disaster that had left the ceiling pink for 2 days. Evelyn laughed in all the right places, nodded where it mattered, and let herself relax into the rhythm. Not once did she mention the wedding. Not once did she say, "I flew across the country for your father's wedding and was erased by text message." Because this moment wasn't about him. It wasn't about loss or humiliation or betrayal. It was about sitting across from someone who made her feel like she still existed in full color. Lila was wearing a simple white blouse and tiny gold hoops. Her cheeks flushed easily when she laughed. She told Evelyn about a seminar on postmodern literature and how one of the professors insisted on calling The Great Gatsby a failed love story about capitalism. Evelyn smiled. "Do you agree with him?" Lila shrugged. "I think Gatsby needed a grandmother. Might have saved him a lot of trouble." The food arrived. Evelyn picked at her salad, more out of habit than hunger. She watched Lila eat with the clean appetite of youth, unburdened, unaware. That unawareness stung for a moment, but then it softened. She deserved it. She didn't need to carry the pain of what her father had done. When they were nearly finished, Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out the small velvet box she'd carried across 3 airports and into a hotel she never meant to stay in. "I brought something for you," she said, placing it gently on the table. Lila blinked. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was the locket, gold, oval, engraved with delicate letters, L, M, and EM, for Lila Moore and Evelyn Moore, 2 initials that held the weight of generations. Lila lifted it like it might break in her hands. "It's beautiful. It was meant to be part of the wedding gift," Evelyn said steady, "but I think it was always meant for you." Lila opened it carefully. On one side, a photograph of Evelyn at age 20. Short curls, soft eyes. On the other, Lila at 5, missing her front teeth, mid-giggle. They looked so much alike, the resemblance startled even Evelyn sometimes. "I don't know what to say," Lila whispered. "Just say you'll keep it. I will." Evelyn reached for her teacup. "You don't have to wear it now. Or tomorrow. Just when you want to remember that someone sees you. Really sees you." Lila nodded slowly, the box still open in front of her like an offering. They paid the bill. Lila tried to argue, but Evelyn shook her head with a smile that left no room for debate. Outside, the afternoon sun softened the edge of the pavement, and the jacarandas overhead shed little purple blooms onto the sidewalk like confetti. Lila hugged her again before they parted. This time, longer. No words, just warmth. Evelyn stood there for a few moments after she'd walked away, the table cleared behind her, the locket now gone from her purse, but not from her heart. It hadn't gone where it was supposed to. It had gone where it was needed, and in that, there was peace. Back home, tucked into the left-hand drawer of Evelyn's writing desk, was a worn manila folder labeled in neat block letters. Nate. Nothing sentimental, no hearts, no flourishes, just the name of her only child, sharp and unadorned. She had started the folder 20 years ago. At first, it was simply for record keeping. Copies of checks, transfer receipts, notes scribbled on the backs of utility bills. A system, not a statement. But over time, it became something else. A quiet chronicle. A ledger not of love, but of the cost of holding on to someone who kept stepping further away. Now, in her hotel room 2 states away, Evelyn opened her suitcase, pulled out a zippered leather pouch, and retrieved the copy she'd brought, the travel version of the Nate file. Just in case. She hadn't known why she packed it, only that something told her she might need it. She laid the contents out on the desk, piece by piece, like evidence in a case she no longer wanted to prosecute. There were old emails, bank slips, scribbled notes from late-night phone calls. The earliest item was from 2003, a cashier's check for $12,000, marked first apartment deposit. Nate had called panicked, said Jenna's job hadn't come through yet, said they just needed help for a few months. That apartment lasted a year. The in-laws helped with the next one. No one mentioned Evelyn's contribution. There was the $6,800 for credit card debt after Nate got laid off. "We're drowning, Mom," he'd said, voice low like he didn't want Jenna to hear. Evelyn had wired it the next morning. Hospital bills, groceries, rent during Clara's infancy, a new crib, a replacement car battery, a laptop when Jenna's crashed, diapers, formula, moving costs, broken plumbing, a torn ACL, an IRS late fee, not huge sums but steady ones, like a leak you don't notice until the ceiling caves in. Evelyn never asked for repayment. Not once. She'd always considered it part of motherhood. Quiet, invisible support. That's what love looked like, right? Consistent deposits with no expectations. But as she turned page after page, her hand slowed. There it was, 4 months ago. A transfer of $3,000. Nate had called it wedding incidentals. Evelyn remembered it clearly. He was rushed, upbeat, full of plans. Said they were trying to lock in the florist, cover deposits for the venue, maybe book live music. "It's tight, Mom, but we want it to be beautiful." And she had smiled. She had said of course. She had transferred the money that same day. Now, sitting in a sterile hotel room just miles from that same venue, the one she was uninvited from, Evelyn stared at the figure like it had teeth. $3,000. $3,000 to help fund the celebration of her own erasure. She stood abruptly, walked to the window, and pressed a hand to the glass. The city stretched beneath her. Sun-kissed streets, trees blooming with intention, lives unfolding in all directions. Somewhere out there, her son was picking up his tuxedo. Somewhere out there, a champagne glass she helped pay for was being polished. She closed her eyes. It wasn't the money. It never was. It was the assumption. The assumption that she would give without question, that she'd be grateful just to be orbiting his life, even from a distance, that she'd never look too closely at the math, that her absence wouldn't cost him anything, but it had cost her everything. She turned back to the desk and began stacking the papers again, this time slowly, deliberately. Each sheet was heavier than it looked, not in weight, but in what it represented. Not generosity, not love, use. Evelyn slid the folder back into her bag, but kept the $3,000 slip out. She held it between her fingers for a moment before folding it in half and placing it in the trash bin beneath the desk. Let that be the first to go. The rest would follow soon enough, because this wasn't a one-time slight. It wasn't just a forgotten invitation. It was a 20-year story told in dollars and silence, a pattern, a relationship built on her willingness to stay quiet and available, no more. The next morning she would finalize the trust. She would sign her name and sever the pipeline. And for the first time in 2 decades, her money would not go where her love wasn't welcome. She would rewrite the legacy, not out of anger, but because dignity had a cost too, and she was finally ready to pay it. Evelyn didn't cry, not when she tossed the $3,000 transfer slip in the trash. Not when she unpacked the navy dress she'd chosen for a wedding she'd never see. And not when she laid the heirloom veil gently across the hotel bed like a relic from a forgotten religion. Instead, she reached for the notepad again. Same one from earlier. Cream paper, blue trim, too pristine for what needed to be written on it now. She sat down at the desk, pen in hand, and began to write. Not to Nate, not to Jenna, not even to Lila. She wrote to herself. No preamble, no Dear Evelyn, just a clean line across the top. The moment you finally knew. It wasn't the text, she realized as the words began to fill the page. It wasn't the absence of an invitation or the suddenness of being erased at the airport gate. That moment had been loud, yes, brutal in its brevity. But it wasn't the beginning. This had started years ago. It started when the phone calls stopped coming for no reason. When thanks mom turned into nothing at all. When holidays were rescheduled, then forgotten altogether. When her birthday became a text with no punctuation. When Nate stopped calling her mom and started calling her Evelyn in front of his friends. That was the slow burn of being ghosted by your own child. It didn't come with door slams or shouted accusations. It came with gentle closures, polite excuses, and the slow quiet of being recategorized into someone's past. She kept writing, line after line. She wasn't even sure what she was saying now. Just that it felt like breathing underwater for too long and finally breaking the surface. She remembered Christmas, 5 years ago, the last time they all gathered under her roof. Lila was still in middle school. Jenna had brought a wine she couldn't pronounce. Nate had barely looked up from his phone. He offered to help with dishes, but then disappeared into the guest room for half the night, claiming work. Evelyn had laughed it off, made a pot of decaf, and told herself not to take it personally. But now, sitting in this hotel room far from her quiet Michigan kitchen, she saw it clearly. That wasn't work. That was avoidance. That was a man who didn't know how to be around the woman who had raised him. Maybe because she reminded him of who he used to be. Maybe because she was inconvenient. Too Midwest, too sentimental, too real. You didn't want to fold me into your curated life, she wrote slowly, pressing hard enough for the pen to indent the page beneath. So I unfolded myself. She underlined it, then sat back. There it was. The truth. She wasn't unwanted because she had failed him. She was unwanted because she no longer fit. He had polished his life like a brochure, carefully staged smiles, perfect lighting, people who looked good on Instagram. And somewhere along the way, his own mother became too textured to include, too ordinary, too unedited. She looked over at the veil again. It was draped over the back of a chair now, the lace catching the dim light like frost on old windows. That veil had more history in it than any influencer wedding could hold. It had been worn through war and widowhood, sewn by hands that scrubbed floors and baked bread from scratch. Evelyn had carried it across the country thinking it might mean something, and it did, just not to Nate. She folded her pages slowly, placed them in her suitcase. Not to keep, just not ready to toss them yet. She poured herself a glass of water from the plastic-wrapped cup beside the sink. It tasted like chlorine and resignation. She brushed her teeth, smoothed the comforter, and turned off the bedside lamp. The glow from the streetlights filtered in through the heavy curtains. She stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift and stretch. Her mind was quiet, her chest hollow, but not collapsing. She thought about her mother, Ruth, the one who wore the veil first. She wondered what Ruth would have done. Probably the same thing. Sat with the grief, wrote it down, and kept her chin up at breakfast. By 3 a.m., Evelyn still hadn't slept, but the tightness in her stomach had begun to loosen. She wasn't broken. She was clear, not abandoned, just released. And in the silence of that longest night, she began to feel the first thread of something new. Not hope, not yet, but something stronger. Self. The city woke before Evelyn did. She lay in bed long after sunrise, the light pushing stubbornly through the edges of the blackout curtains. When she finally rose, it wasn't with purpose, but with momentum. One foot after the other. Shower, clothes, no makeup. She pulled on slacks, a soft gray sweater, and tied her hair back with a clip she'd nearly left behind. She didn't bring the veil. She left it folded across the foot of the bed, as delicate and quiet as the version of her who had arrived with it. Out on the street, the air was warm, the kind of dry heat that made everything feel slightly sunlit, even in the shade. Evelyn walked without direction, letting the sidewalk guide her, past cafes with tiny chalkboard signs, flower stalls beginning to bloom, and couples in workout gear sipping green smoothies like pennants. No one looked at her, no one knew her. And yet, she felt more visible here than she had in years. At home, she was Nate's mom, when anyone remembered to ask. At family dinners, she was polite background noise. She'd started to vanish long before the wedding, but here she walked alone and felt intact. A block ahead, a bakery caught her eye, nothing fancy. Brick facade, metal tables out front. A chalkboard sign read, "Fresh cinnamon rolls. Too much frosting, just right." That was enough. Inside, the air was thick with sugar and butter. A boy behind the counter, barely old enough to drive, grinned without expectation. "Just one?" he asked. Evelyn smiled. "Just one." He boxed it gently, slid it across the counter. "You want coffee with that?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, black." She paid in cash. The boy called her ma'am, with the kind of sweetness that didn't sting. She found a table near the window, unboxed the roll, and took the first bite. It was warm, oversweet, ridiculous in size, and perfect. She ate slowly, tearing it into small pieces, licking icing off her fingers like she had nothing else to prove. The city moved around her. A woman in heels rushed past, phone to her ear. A toddler in a yellow dress dropped a toy, and a stranger picked it up before the mother could turn around. Across the street, two old men argued about parking meters and then shared a laugh. Kindness, in these tiny, invisible acts. Not one of these people knew her name, but somehow they saw her more than her son had in years. She sipped her coffee, bitter and grounding. It was here in this ordinary morning moment that she realized something. She wasn't mourning Nate. Not really. She was mourning the role she had once held, the title of mother that used to come with meaning. But the boy she raised, the one who used to fall asleep on her shoulder with peanut butter on his chin, he wasn't the man who sent that text. That man was someone else. Shiny, successful, and curated to a fault. "You didn't want to fold me into your perfect life," she had written, "so I unfolded myself." Now she was living it. The freedom was subtle but real. It wasn't banners and declarations. It was a cinnamon roll eaten alone without apology. It was walking slowly and not needing to be anywhere. It was knowing she had pulled the plug on every bank transfer, every silent sacrifice. She had stopped funding the version of herself that only existed to be convenient. She finished the roll, wiped her fingers with the napkin, and sat back. Around her, the tables filled and emptied. Conversations rose and fell. No one asked her what she was doing here. No one cared that she'd been left off a guest list. And yet, somehow, she had never felt more complete. She stood, dropped the napkin in the bin, and stepped back into the sunlight. Her shoes clicked against the pavement as she turned toward the square at the center of town. There was a bench beneath a jacaranda tree, half shade, half bloom. She sat, adjusted her sweater, and let the breeze move through her like a page finely turned. From across the street, a young father knelt to tie his son's shoe. A woman paused to help a stranger carry 2 paper bags to the corner. No cameras, no applause, just grace in real time. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap and closed her eyes. This wasn't the life she'd expected, but it was hers now. And for the first time in far too long, she wasn't surviving it for someone else. She was simply living it, with frosting on her fingers, the sun on her back, and no one's permission in her pocket. The law office didn't look like much. Second floor, no elevator, tucked above a dry cleaner whose neon sign buzzed faintly even in daylight. The door was painted forest green, chipped at the corners. A brass plaque read, "Susan Green, attorney at law." Nothing glamorous, nothing trying to impress. Evelyn liked that. She didn't need polished stone and soft jazz. She needed a woman who understood sharp lines and clean exits. Susan opened the door herself. "Evelyn," she said, her voice crisp but kind. "Right on time." Evelyn stepped in, her handbag tucked tight against her side, a calm expression that had taken 3 days to learn. The office smelled faintly of old paper and lavender oil, comforting, direct, lived in. "Would you like tea?" "No," Evelyn said, settling into the chair across from the desk. "Let's begin." Susan nodded once, then slid a blue folder across the desk. "Everything's been drafted exactly as we discussed. The living trust has been updated. Your estate, accounts, and assets are all now designated to Lila Moore." Evelyn opened the folder. She scanned the documents line by line. Her name, spelled in full, Evelyn Grace Moore, her granddaughter's name, Lila Margaret Moore, the breakdown of the trust, the conditions, access before age 25 only for education, health care, or a first home. Full access at 25, no loopholes, no ambiguity. It was clean, strong, final. "And the clause?" Evelyn asked. Susan slid another page forward. "Here, a no contest clause. If Nathaniel Moore attempts to dispute or access the trust in any way, he forfeits any potential claim to residual or discretionary funds." Evelyn read it twice, then nodded. "I want it ironclad." "It is." Evelyn took the pen Susan offered. It was heavier than she expected. Matte black, smooth, weighted. She liked the way it felt in her hand. She signed, "Evelyn G. Moore." Again, initials, date, signature, no hesitation, no second-guessing. Only the quiet clarity of a woman who'd had enough. When she finished, Susan slid the documents into a sealed envelope and wrote her own initials on the flap. "I assume you don't want me to notify him." "No," Evelyn said. "Let the silence speak." Susan paused for a moment, considering her. "Most clients come in with doubt, grief. They ask if they're being too harsh. I spent 20 years giving without being asked," Evelyn said. "This is just the first thing I'm taking back." Susan leaned back slightly. "You know, Evelyn, we don't talk enough about quiet power. People think strength comes with raised voices and slammed doors. But this is silence with teeth." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Good. That's exactly what I was going for." She placed the signed documents back in the folder and stood. The pen clicked back into its case. No ceremony, no flourish. Outside, the air felt different. Warmer, like something had been lifted. She walked back down the narrow staircase and into the sun. Her shoes clicked against the concrete, and with every step, something inside her began to settle. She wasn't angry. She wasn't heartbroken. She was aligned. Back in the hotel room, she placed the envelope in the side pocket of her suitcase. Not hidden, not displayed, just exactly where it belonged. The veil still lay on the bed, untouched since that first night. Evelyn sat beside it for a moment, fingers brushing the lace. She wasn't saving it for a wedding anymore. She was saving it for someone who would ask. Later, she made herself tea, chamomile, no sugar. She sat by the window, legs crossed, her notebook in her lap. She wrote a single line. "He will learn, eventually, what silence costs." Then closed the notebook. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. She hadn't written a speech or stood up at the wedding in protest. She hadn't sent a message or a photo or even a warning. She had simply removed herself from the equation, removed her name from the financial lifeline he assumed would always be there, removed her son from her future, removed the need to wait for a call that wouldn't come. She had left behind the version of herself that begged to be included. And in its place, she had built a version that didn't need permission. Evelyn Moore wasn't being cruel. She was being clear. Let the flowers bloom without her. Let the toast be made. Let the photos circulate without her name mentioned. She had rewritten the only legacy that mattered. And this time her silence would bite, not loudly, but decisively, like teeth in velvet. Evelyn waited until nightfall. The city outside her hotel window had quieted into soft lights and muffled sounds. Laughter drifted faintly from the sidewalk below. Somewhere nearby, someone was living a life untouched by erasure. She sat at the desk beneath the dim lamp, hotel stationery laid out in front of her. Thick, cream-colored paper with the name of the chain embossed at the top, as if permanence could be borrowed. A matching envelope waited to be filled, but she already knew this letter would never be mailed. She uncapped the pen. Not a text, not an email, ink on paper, a decision made with weight. At the top she wrote his name. Nate. Not my darling, not son, just Nate, the man he had become, the man who had sent 5 words to undo 5 decades of devotion. She paused, then began. I arrived Thursday as planned. I brought the veil, I brought the check, I brought the dress you'll never see. I stood at gate 14 with my suitcase full of history and hope, and your message arrived just before baggage claim. Actually, it's just her family. Not a greeting, not a warning, just dismissal, like I was a package misrouted. At first I waited. I thought there might be a follow-up. I'm sorry, please still come. We'll figure it out. But there was nothing. And so I made my own plan. I checked into a hotel. I ate alone. I walked the city. I watched strangers show more kindness than I've received from you in years. I used to think being a mother came with an unspoken agreement, that if I loved you wholly, endlessly, quietly, that you would carry at least the memory of it with you, that it would matter when decisions were made. But somewhere along the way, I became an inconvenience, too old, too ordinary, not polished enough for the life you curated. You didn't want to fold me into your perfect image. So I unfolded myself. I've canceled all transfers. I've removed your access. I've rewritten my will, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Lila is now the sole heir. Not because she's your daughter, but because she sees me. Because she met me for lunch and didn't flinch when I told her the truth. Because she carried the locket I gave her in the pocket of her dress, while you were busy making toasts to a version of family I no longer belong to. I have given you more than you'll ever inventory. The money, the nights awake with fever, the college deposit, the wedding check you cashed before uninviting me. You never once said thank you. But worse, you never once asked who I was when I stopped being useful. I'm not mailing this because I don't expect a response. You don't deserve the weight of this truth in your inbox, but I needed to write it anyway. To say, I saw what you did. I felt what you withdrew. And I'm no longer filling the silence with excuses. If one day you wonder why the bank is quiet, why the birthday card doesn't arrive, why the call doesn't come when your world tilts again, I hope this letter comes back to you in memory, not as guilt, but as understanding. You didn't lose me because I failed you. You lost me because you erased me. Love, because I never stopped. Mom. She read it twice. Not to edit, just to feel the rhythm of the truth. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't laced with spite. It was precise, calm, unapologetically honest. She folded it once, then again, and slid it into the envelope. On the front she wrote, Nate. That was all. She didn't seal it, didn't tuck it into her purse. She placed it on the corner of the desk, perfectly aligned, not to be mailed, not to be delivered, but to exist, as proof, as closure, as the final page in a story she was no longer writing. Then she stood, drew the curtains, and turned off the lamp. The letter sat beneath the soft light from the hallway, casting a long shadow across the desk. A quiet monument, a truth unshared but not unsaid. She climbed into bed without ceremony, pulled the blanket to her shoulders, and let the stillness settle around her. He would never read it, and yet she had never spoken louder. The morning of the wedding was bright and unapologetically beautiful. Sunlight poured in through the thin hotel curtains, warming the room in a way that felt indifferent, like the day was going to be golden whether she had a seat or not. Evelyn dressed slowly, not in the navy dress she'd brought for the ceremony, still hanging untouched in the closet. She chose soft gray slacks, a blouse with a gentle collar, and a cardigan the color of pale fog. Comfortable, presentable, unremarkable enough to go unnoticed, but composed enough to sit with dignity. She tucked a small notebook and a pen into her handbag. Not the veil, not the card, not the locket. Those had already found their places, or had been returned to her care. She left the hotel around 10:30, catching a cab with a driver who didn't speak beyond asking for the address. "Just drop me near the corner," she said. "I won't be going inside." The venue sat perched on a hillside, all white archways and curated hedges, the kind of place built for drone footage and Instagram moments. It had a name carved into stone at the front gate, too elegant to pronounce without sounding rehearsed. Guests filtered in slowly, linen suits, pastel dresses, carefully pressed smiles. Across the street, beneath a jacaranda tree just beginning to bloom, Evelyn found a bench. She sat down, legs crossed at the ankle, hands folded neatly in her lap. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't watching with hope. She was simply observing, like someone who had once been part of the script and now read it silently from the back of the theater. The breeze rustled through the trees. Somewhere inside, string instruments warmed up, a cello, a violin, soft enough to feel like suggestion more than song. Evelyn scanned the guests arriving. She saw Jenna's mother in a lavender shawl, carrying a small clutch that matched her heels. She saw groups of young people with sleek hair and expensive watches. She saw a photographer with 2 cameras slung over his shoulders, crouching for the perfect angle. Then she saw him, Nate. He stepped out of a black car, tall and confident in his tuxedo, hair styled the way she used to brush it before kindergarten picture day. He was laughing, head tilted, mouth wide, the kind of laugh meant to reassure everyone that everything was just as it should be. He didn't look across the street. He didn't pause. Not once. Evelyn didn't flinch. She'd prepared herself for this living proof that her absence cost him nothing. The best man said something, and Nate laughed again, reaching out to adjust his cufflinks. Jenna appeared next, radiant in pearl pink, her hair twisted into something intricate and flawless. She looped her arm through his, and they walked together toward the archway covered in white roses. That's when Evelyn saw the centerpieces being carried out, clusters of hydrangeas and roses in pale blush and ivory. She didn't need to guess. She recognized them immediately from the email Nate had forwarded months ago asking, "Can you help with some final incidentals? The florist's charging extra for full coverage, $3,000. That's what those petals were worth." "I paid for this celebration of my erasure," she murmured, the words dry and precise as if spoken through glass. She watched as the guests took their seats, watched as chairs filled, a hush settled, and the music swelled. She didn't count the seconds. She counted the choices, each one he made that led here, each one she made that led here too. And still, she didn't cry. The ceremony was brief, no more than 25 minutes. She couldn't hear the vows, but she could see the shapes of them, the way heads tilted, the way hands were held just long enough for a photo, the way Nate looked down at his bride with a curated awe. And then applause. Polite, timed, perfect. They turned back down the aisle to cheers, flower petals tossed in the air. Evelyn watched him pose with Jenna's family, her parents, her sisters, aunts and uncles who had names Evelyn didn't know. Nate held a champagne flute. She recognized the design, ordered in bulk from the vendor whose invoice she'd paid in April. She stood, brushing a few jacaranda petals from her lap. It didn't ache, not the way she'd feared. It confirmed what she already knew. She had been written out long ago. This was just the performance of it. And yet, she had survived it. She turned away from the venue, walking back toward the city, toward life, toward something that didn't require her to beg for belonging. Across the street, a man in a pressed suit opened the gate for another guest. Evelyn didn't look back. The wedding was over, and so was the waiting. The morning after the wedding, the sky was pale and still, as if the world itself had exhaled. Evelyn arrived at the little cafe a few minutes early, choosing a table in the same corner where she and Lila had met just days before. She ordered coffee, strong, black, no room for pleasantries, and waited with the quiet steadiness of someone who had already grieved what she came to lose. Lila arrived late, not by much, but enough to show she hadn't slept well. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, makeup-free, shoulders slightly hunched. She wore a soft cardigan over jeans and kept wringing the strap of her bag in her fingers like she was trying to keep herself from unraveling. When she saw Evelyn, she didn't smile. She just sat down and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Evelyn reached across the table and touched her hand gently. "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart." Lila nodded but didn't speak right away. The server brought water and menus, which neither of them touched. For a moment, they just sat there in the quiet hum of the waking world. Dishes clinking, espresso machines hissing, silverware being wrapped in napkins. Finally, Lila said, "He told everyone you didn't feel up to traveling." Evelyn blinked slowly. "Did he?" "He said you were dealing with health stuff, that the flight would have been too hard, that you wanted to be there in spirit." Evelyn didn't answer. She lifted her coffee cup instead, letting the heat settle into her palms before taking a sip. "I waited," Lila continued. "During the toasts, I waited for someone to mention you, even once, just a nod, a too bad she couldn't be here. But no one did. It was like you didn't exist." Evelyn set her cup down. "I know." Lila looked up sharply. "You knew he would lie?" "I didn't know what form it would take," Evelyn said calmly. "But I knew there would be a version of the story that made everyone else comfortable." Lila exhaled through her nose, her voice suddenly hard. "You were erased and replaced by a lie." Evelyn didn't flinch. "Yes," she said, "but truth has a longer memory." Lila was quiet, but her hands were trembling. "I should have said something." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "You did what I hoped you would do. You saw. You remembered. You met me here, after. I kept thinking," Lila swallowed, "if this had happened to me, if I had been the one left out, I don't know if I would have handled it the way you did." Evelyn tilted her head. "How would you have handled it?" "I would have shown up, stormed in, demanded answers, made a scene." Evelyn smiled, not out of amusement but out of recognition. "That's because you're still young. You think justice always comes with noise." Lila's voice dropped. "Maybe it should." "Sometimes," Evelyn agreed. "But sometimes silence is the only language people notice, especially when they're used to taking you for granted." Lila sat back, eyes glossy but not falling. "He looked right through everyone yesterday, like he had something to sell. I kept watching him, waiting for some flicker of guilt, but he just smiled for the photos, made speeches about family." "And you?" Evelyn asked softly. "I clapped, I smiled, and I hated myself for it." Evelyn shook her head. "Don't. You weren't pretending for him. You were surviving a moment you didn't create. That's not shameful, that's strength." The server came by. Lila ordered a tea she wouldn't touch. Evelyn asked for a cinnamon roll, this time to share. Something about the gesture made the table feel less like a battlefield. After a pause, Lila reached into her bag and pulled out the locket again. She placed it between them, fingers resting on the edge. "I wore it," she said. "I kept touching it during the ceremony, like it might anchor me." Evelyn didn't reach for it. "Did it?" "Yes," Lila said. "It reminded me I came from someone who doesn't lie to keep things pretty." That struck something in Evelyn she didn't show. Instead, she broke off a piece of the cinnamon roll and handed it across the table. "Then keep it," she said. "Not just as a reminder of me, but as a reminder of who you are." They sat in silence, eating slowly, as the cafe filled with noise that didn't touch them. When the check came, Lila took it without asking, waving off Evelyn's protest with a smirk that almost passed for peace. Outside, before they parted, Lila hugged her again. "I want to stay close," she whispered. "Not out of obligation, but because I see you, and I want you in my life." Evelyn held her just a little tighter. "Then we've already begun again." And this time, there was no lie between them. The taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving Evelyn alone at the edge of her driveway. The house looked just as it had before she left. Modest, two-story white shutters slightly weathered, flower beds in need of weeding. But something inside her had changed so completely that the structure now felt like a container waiting to be refilled. She unlocked the front door, the familiar creak greeting her like an old companion. The air was still, no welcome home scent, no echo of footsteps or conversation, just quiet, not lonely, not heavy, just clean. She set her suitcase in the entryway, hung her coat, and paused. A framed photo of Nate as a boy still sat on the hallway table. 7 years old, missing a tooth, holding a soccer trophy, cheeks flushed with joy. Evelyn didn't look away. She didn't turn the frame face down. She just stared for a moment, then kept walking. In the living room, Richard's old chair remained by the window. His books still lined the shelves. She let her hand glide across the spines. Nothing needed to be removed. His absence had always felt full. Her son's, on the other hand, had turned to vacancy long ago. She made herself tea, chamomile with mint, her own blend. The mug she chose read, "World's Okayest Mom," a gift from Lila when she was 12. Evelyn smiled as she poured. Afterwards, she walked upstairs and retrieved the manila folder from her suitcase, the one labeled NATE in all caps, worn and heavy with 20 years of paper. She brought it to the kitchen table, sat down, and began. She removed the contents one at a time: bank transfers, check copies, scribbled notes with dates and amounts, receipts for emergencies that had never been repaid, a printout of the florist invoice, final floral balance, $2,956.87. She looked at that one for a long time. Then she picked up the shredder from the hallway closet, plugged it in, and fed the first sheet through. It made a soft whirring sound. Clean, efficient. She didn't rush. There was no anger in her motions, no vengeance in the rhythm, just intention. Page after page, $12,000 for the first apartment, $6,800 for credit card debt, $2,300 for a medical deductible, uncounted gifts, silent deposits, the cost of unconditional love, one line item at a time. Each shred felt like a goodbye that didn't need words. She paused only once, on a letter Nate had written her in college, before Jenna, before the slow fade. It was short, thanking her for a care package, telling her he missed her meatloaf, that he was stressed but fine, that he loved her. She folded it gently and set it aside, not out of sentiment, but as proof that something real had once existed. She wouldn't keep it forever, just for now. When the folder was empty, she ran her hand along the inside, as if checking for remnants. Then she fed the folder itself into the shredder. The cardboard bent, fought back slightly, then vanished with the same finality as the rest. She unplugged the machine, carried the bin to the recycling bag, and tied it off. The paper was lighter than it had felt in her hands. That surprised her. Upstairs, in the linen closet, she reached for the cedar box. Inside, wrapped in a clean white handkerchief, was the veil. She sat on the bed and unfolded it slowly. Her fingers moved with the care of memory, not mourning. The lace was still intact, the ivory netting soft as breath. She held it up to the light for a moment, letting it catch the sun. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. This veil had survived more than one woman's heartbreak. It had been worn through weddings, funerals, war, recession, rebirth. It had meaning not because it had been used, but because it had been kept. She folded it again, smooth and square, tied it with a fresh ribbon, and placed it back in the cedar box. She didn't lock it. She didn't hide it away. She simply stored it, for someone who would one day ask, someone who would see its value not as accessory, but as inheritance. Back downstairs, she set the bag of shredded paper near the back door for collection. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't hollow. She walked room to room. No rush, no hesitation. The photos stayed, the memories stayed. But the waiting was gone. There would be no more deposits into a relationship that had withdrawn from her years ago. No more anxious holidays, hoping to be included. No more tiptoeing around truth in the name of family. She had sealed her trust. She had sealed the folder. And now, she had sealed the space around her peace. The cost of erasure had been tallied, and Evelyn Moore had shredded the balance. 3 months passed quietly, and Evelyn didn't mark the days. Spring rolled into early summer without fanfare, but the garden knew. The tulips bloomed on time, their deep reds and soft yellows stretching toward the sun like they hadn't considered not returning. The lilacs clustered thick along the fence line. Even the stubborn hydrangeas she nearly gave up on had come in full, bold, and unapologetic. She spent most mornings in the backyard with dirt beneath her nails and a wide-brimmed hat shading her face. Not to escape, not to fill time, but because the act of growing something felt honest, predictable. You water, you prune, you wait. And if you're lucky, things bloom. Lila came by most Saturdays, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with cookies from a bakery she'd discovered downtown. She never came empty-handed, but more importantly, she never came out of obligation. She'd sit at the kitchen table in Evelyn's old cardigans, sometimes barefoot, always curious, and they'd talk about everything except the wedding. They spoke of Lila's coursework, her new professor who wore bow ties unironically, her growing interest in ceramics. They debated books, swapped movie recommendations, and sometimes sat in companionable silence while sipping tea. The locket never left her neck. Evelyn didn't ask about Nate, and Lila never brought him up. The silence between them was not strained. It was respected. It was chosen. One morning, while cleaning out the old hallway cabinet, Evelyn stumbled across a forgotten envelope tucked between 2 boxes of holiday cards. Inside was a photo. She recognized it instantly. Nate, 9 years old, a fishing pole in one hand, a blue baseball cap turned backward, holding up a sunfish barely the size of his palm. They'd been at the lake that summer. Richard had taken the photo, laughing when Nate nearly dropped the fish in excitement. Evelyn could still hear that laugh if she closed her eyes. Could still feel the sun on her arms, the way her son's hand had slipped into hers when they walked back to the cabin. She held the photo for a moment. Not too long, just enough. Then she slipped it into a drawer, not to display, not to forget, but to keep quietly, like a pressed flower in a book. She didn't reach out. Nate hadn't called, not since the wedding, not even after the transfer stopped, after the legal access vanished, after the will was rewritten and sealed. Evelyn had half expected an email, maybe even a formal request through the lawyer, but there was nothing. And she didn't care. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt free. Freedom, she'd learned, was not a declaration. It was a series of small, deliberate acts. Making tea the way she liked it. Planting dahlias without wondering if someone else would approve. Choosing silence not because she had no voice, but because it no longer needed to be wasted. She donated the formal navy dress to a women's shelter. Packed the shoes in a box labeled "Gone." The veil remained in the cedar chest, folded with care, untouched, but not forgotten, still waiting, for someone who would ask, not assume. One afternoon, she sat in her garden with Lila, both of them bare-legged and sun-warmed. Lila looked up from the book she was reading and said, "You seem lighter." Evelyn smiled, watering can in hand. "Maybe I am." That night, she made a note in her journal. Not a long entry, just a few words. "I stopped waiting for a return that was never coming, and somehow I came back to myself." She slept well. In the morning, she stood on her porch with her tea, watching the breeze move through the trees. A small girl rode past on a pink bike, training wheels clicking along the pavement. She waved at Evelyn without hesitation. Evelyn waved back, smiling. There was no ceremony in her life now, no spotlight, no performance. But there was peace, the kind that doesn't arrive with applause, the kind you earn, the kind you protect. And if you're still reading, if you've ever sat alone at an airport with a suitcase full of love and nowhere to place it, know this: you are not disposable. You are not an afterthought or a footnote or someone else's optional extra. You are the root. You held the line. You gave the love. You stayed when others left. And you, yes, you, are never ever too late to begin again.